Hello everyone, I'm Raul Gutierrez, founder and CEO of Tinybop. Welcome to our somewhat empty studios, and let's switch over to my computer and get this started. So let's talk about Tinybop. Tinybop is a digital media company, and most of what we've done up to date is the opposite of traditional storytelling. We make science apps that are models. We make construction kit apps where kids can make up their own stories. And we just started making games where story is implied but not articulated. Let me explain. So our Explorers Library series is a set of apps that are lushly illustrated. They cover big subjects, and they were inspired by school posters, children's encyclopedias, classroom models. There are 10 apps in this series. They cover the human body and space and weather and so on. Each of them are all about revealing the invisible, exposing systems, making connections, and opening kids to new ideas. So if there's a general formula to this series, it's that we choose a subject that we think is universal, generally a science subject, and we create a simulation where the learning is embedded in the interaction. So for example, with the human body, if we're exploring the skeletal system, we might show the skeleton, and if a child tugged at the spinal cord, the entire body would collapse. And so in that interaction, a kid might learn that the skeleton holds the body up. These apps are all about play. We try to create cycles where there's no beginning and no end. The point of this series is not so much to answer questions, but to prompt them. We measure success by the number of questions children ask. The second series is called Digital Toys. Digital toys are construction kits. They allow kids to give form to their imagination and bring creations to life. The first app in this series is called the Robot Factory. It's Apple's iPad app of the year a few years ago. Kids build robots. In other apps in this series, they build little versions of themselves. They do programming. They might build video games. To give you an example of one of these apps, this is a scene from an app called Me. And even though it's about me, it's really about all the people around a kid. So it asks children to create an avatar, and then we ask the child who's important in your life. And they might say their mother, their father, or friend. And then we have a set of questions, and we have, I think, 600 questions. And we say, what's my favorite thing about this person? What's something frustrating about this person? What's something I like to do with this person? And little by little in this app, children build a map of their lives and a map of their relationships. And unlike a family tree, we don't care if you have two mothers or two fathers or your family's non-traditional. It really lets the child build it from the way that they experience the world. Even though the app is called Me, it's really about all the other people in the child's life. It's one of my favorites in our portfolio. So with digital toys, if there's a formula here, it's that we have a construction kit, we have a set of parts, and we allow children to assemble those parts in any way that they see fit, sometimes in ways that are unexpected to us. Then we have a little bit of engineering to make all those pieces come together. And the output of these apps are the stories that children tell about the thing they've created. So in our Robot Factory app, some kids see robots as some idealized version of themselves. Sometimes they see robots as somebody that's going to help them or teacher. And so when we ask children about robots, we know we've done our job when they say, well, this is a helper robot. My mom, my dad's not around, and this robot helps my mom around the house because she needs a lot of help. And so that's how we measure success internally. Final thing that we just started doing is making games. So the first game that we've created is called Things That Go Bump. It was created for Apple Arcade, the new subscription service from Apple. We use ideas from both series here. We did have a little bit of a story. We had an implicit story. This game takes place in a house, an enchanted house where different things come to life. There are, different parts in this house that kids can put together in different ways, and they create little creatures, and they battle each other. And this is the first game that we made, and games are very different than the other things that we do, which are really toys. Toy doesn't have a beginning or an end. In a game, you're trying to win something or compete against something. And so it was a little bit of a departure from us, but it was quite fun and has led us to other things. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our thought process. Back in 2010, I was at a crossroads. I was looking for a new project. My family, my wife, very Luddite in terms of how we raise our children. In our house, we didn't even have a TV. We had wooden toys and so on. I was trying to figure out what I was going to do next. I used to work in film, but I had worked in startups for a while, and I was thinking about all sorts of things. And in the middle of this process, my then almost 6-year-old was about to have a birthday party. He came to me, told me that he wanted to trade his birthday party for an iPhone. And I was horrified. I felt like we just failed as parents. If you know anything about 6-year-olds, you know how important their birthdays are to them. Here was my son willing to sell out all his friends for this thing that we didn't even really let him use very much, but somehow or another it was his favorite toy, this powerful thing in his imagination. And I asked him why. He said, well, a touchscreen is an everything machine. It can be a tool, it could be a camera, he can record his voice, it can be entertainment, he can watch a show, it could be a game, it could be a friend. Kids talk to Siri, and they're very intimate. Kids curl up with their phones, they nestle with them. And so we didn't give our kid a phone. He still had his birthday party, but it really got me thinking. I started thinking about why I and so many other parents really distrusted screens. We didn't like screen time. Why was I annoyed by them? Why did I want my kids to read books and play outside and play with blocks? But I was curious, and I really started looking at what my kid was seeing on screens when he had access to them, what other kids were seeing. And my conclusion was that it wasn't so much the device, it wasn't the screen itself, really. I mean, maybe partially, but it was mainly about the content that he was consuming. There was so much, and still is so much, children's content in which the artwork is terrible, there's not a lot of thinking behind it, much of it is designed just to market some other thing. Many of them are full of ads or have otherwise really obnoxious monetization schemes. There are a lot of things that are just the side of gambling, and even things that are educational had kind of this gambling idea to them. Literally, in many of them, there were gold coins that would click on the screen when a child won something, and to elicit this Pavlovian response. And I hated all of that stuff. I asked myself, what is it that I love about childhood? When am I happiest as a parent? Well, I'm happiest as a parent when my child is engaged in play, when they're lost in their imagination, when they're telling a story or listening to a story. And my question was, how do we recreate that? There are so many apps then and now that the entire point of them seem to keep kids stimulated every second without giving them a moment to think. And that's true of a lot of other media as well. It's all about stimulate. If you're a parent, you know that when a kid comes out of those experiences, often they're overstimulated and they're bad-tempered. And my question to myself was, how do we do the opposite? No parent is angry when their kid is playing blocks, drawing, or creating a story. How can we create something that's quiet, contemplative, creative, genuinely educational? And it doesn't have to be educational. It just, but it can be. And for me, play is all about learning. Virtually all animals play to learn. And kids do play in the virtual world, and some of the better designed pieces of content allow children to play. If you ever watched young kids play Minecraft, the minute they discover the multi-user world, oftentimes they'll play hide and go seek. They'll do the same things that they would do in real life, and I think that's great. My question for myself and for the company that I was about to create was, how do we design for quiet? I'm a big believer that often the best creative projects come out of limitations, And that's true for everything from the original iPhone to the Chrysler Building. Most great design comes out of limitations that are either imposed internally or externally. And often the form of the design is a direct product of those limitations. If you're old enough to remember Mac Paint, the screen was exactly 416 pixels wide. Why? Well, it was a 32-bit machine, and there were 13 by 32-bit registers, and 13 times 32 equals 416. And if you wanted to make the screen speedy and move blocks of pixels around, you wanted to make them in some exact multiple of those registers. The form, the shape of that little smiling first Macintosh was a direct result of the things inside it that ran it. Now, obviously, we've moved beyond those kind of limitations in software. And on mobile, sometimes it feels like there are no limitations. You can include video and interaction and sound and so much stuff. So often we have to impose limitations. And here are 10 rules that are sort of a rubric that we measure ourselves against. They're not hard and fast rules, but they're things that we think about on most of our projects. So the first is quiet. One of the first decisions we made was not to punctuate our apps with background music. Music creates emotion. If you're telling stories and you're an animator, you know that you can manipulate emotions with a little bit of music. One of our original ideas with our human body app was to have each system, have a different soundtrack. The circulatory system would have drums, and maybe the brain would be violins and so on. And as you layered the different systems, you'd get this kind of symphony that showed, what the body sounds like metaphorically. And what we found was that the music, the tempo of the music controlled the tempo of children's play. And some children are really fast kids and some really slow kids. And it actually ended up being a distraction. And we found that kids played longer and better when we removed the music. So the first thing that we do is we're not scared of silence. Our apps are musical. We use music environmentally, but they don't have soundtracks. If you remember the game Myst, this is sort of what we aspired to. It was just this mysterious, compelling place that you wanted to explore. And our apps are, we hope, something like that. The second thing, and very important, is work with great artists. So let's do an experiment. Close your eyes and remember your favorite picture book. Do you see the cover in your head? Can you imagine your favorite image from that book? Okay, you open your eyes. This is mine. This is one of my favorite children's books. It meant everything to me. I can remember every page of this book. It invaded my imagination and my nightmares sometimes. As people that create for children, if our work is to stand the test of time, we need to think about apps and content not just as engineering challenges. We have to create images and experiences that are powerful enough to invade memories. Too much content today is disposable. It's just marketing for some other entity. A couple years ago, went to a summit where a woman told me that her company releases 2 apps a week. What are the odds that any of those apps have any meaning? And so much of the core of who those kids are is formed during these years. If they're going to spend time with our content, we need to respect those children. I'm a big believer in spending as much as you can and working with the most creative people that you can find to create these images that invade our dreams. Number 3, reveal yourself slowly. We do a lot of play testing, but one of the problems with play testing is that testers, they kind of want to discover everything quickly because they're in this kind of artificial environment. So my goal is not to have somebody explore everything in one sitting. I want things that are only revealed the 10th time that a child plays or the 100th time. Will they pick up an app after a month? After a year? It's hard. It's a really hard thing to do, especially hard with humor, by the way. Books do it. If you know Richard Scarry's book, this one in particular has a little character named Goldbug who's hidden in every page. It's engineered for delight. Children, when they discover this little hidden feature, will go and find Goldbug. All of our apps have a touch of danger. At least in the US, and especially right now, kids lead these very controlled lives, maybe more controlled than any time in history. Their physical lives are circumscribed. Many kids, right now can't leave their house. And parents try to control their digital lives too. But we learn by experiencing danger and fear. Kids need to be put off balance a little, out of their comfort zone sometimes. If you remember, again, think about your favorite children's book. I'll bet that many of the children's books that you're imagining had some touch of danger or strangeness. So in our apps, if you feed a body too much, it might vomit. If you are playing with clouds in our plants app, you might cause lightning that causes the forest to catch fire. And many robots fail very badly. We think that's a good thing. Leave kids with questions. I think, I've covered that a little bit, but too many children's educational apps and content, they try to answer too much. And that's just not very fun. In my house, when my kids were younger, and still even today, before my kids would go to sleep, we did something called question time. They could ask me any question, and I could ask them any question. I think of our Explorers Library as kind of like a kindling for these kind of questions. Give kids space to think about things and to bring up, something that they were wondering about, something they're curious about. It's a great thing. Engineer for delight, just sweat the details. Again, if you look back to books, who doesn't love a great end page? It's something that obviously they didn't have to do, but a lot of the delight in the book comes in those little details in the end pages. I can't tell you how many times I, explored maps in books that had great end page map. In apps or in digital content, a lot of times, those details have to do with engineering, and it costs money. In our robot app, we connect sounds to the physics of the little robots that kids create. So when the robots are moving around, the sounds that are connected to their joints change based on how fast or how slow they're moving, and it makes everything feel a little more real. In our human body app, we built this very elaborate fart engine that allows kids to create almost an endless variety of farts depending on how quickly or how slowly they're moving their fingers around the screen. And it was totally something that at the time people questioned why we were spending so much time on that, but it's one of kids' favorite things in the app. In films, if you look at a Miyazaki film, like all the little attention to detail is the thing that keeps us coming back to them over and over again. It's hard. Those details cost money. Use powerful inspirations. Each time we start an app, we create a mood board. And that mood board has maybe images or experiences or videos from our life, and they inform our thinking about the subject. Our human body app for me was, there was this image above my abuelita in Mexico, above her bed of this, this woman that was like half skeleton, half human. And it was something that invaded my memory. And so it's very much part of our app. We looked at, old encyclopedias that had transparencies that the different layers of the body would map on top of each other. And that also for me was very powerful, and it directly inspired the app. Some weird image that you saw in China of a giant peach that seemed to spark something, and it somehow gets tied into an app. Different kinds of children's encyclopedias, and our apps are really kind of like this. I think this has always been true. If you look back to the Book of Miracles, which was created by monks in the 16th century, there were things in the world that they found inspiring and awesome. Comet or a rainbow. They collected them in this book that they call the Book of Miracles, and our apps are kind of like these little books of miracles. They're little cathedrals in miniature that are, built by many, many hands, and we hope inspire the same kind of awe. Another big inspiration for us are just, scientific posters. I am old enough to have had them in my classrooms. And then, of course, experiences are important too. We would look at things like, my son Gabriel playing robot. Okay, robot turn off. Robot on. Robot, what is your name?
Tinybop.
Robot, what is your weapon?
A laser.
Can I see the laser? What kind of robot are you?
I am robot.
Arbot, why are you smiling? Did I tell you to smile?
No.
Why are you smiling again, Arbot? I need to see angry faces from Arbot and Gbot. Why does Arbot not have his special hat on? That's enough. And then, of course, there are artists that create great works that inspire us too. And so we were looking at this kind of artwork when we created the Robot Factory. How do we create these little digital creations that have a feeling of life? Go native just means use the device, use the format. Back in the sort of dark ages of computers, I specifically remember this game called Pinball Construction Set. It used every bit of the computer to create something that was inspired by the real world and yet was uniquely digital. These days, you can use accelerometers and vibration motors and cameras and all sorts of cool things within phones if you're working in apps. And if you're working on a big screen, you have to think about where your media is being consumed and how do you use those screens to their maximum effect. Observe. I can't stress how important it is to watch kids, kind of understand what's going on with them, especially right now. The kids that are going through this crisis that our whole world is experiencing are going to come out of it different. My son said to me the other day, it doesn't feel like anything, and yet I feel like everything's changing. And I don't know what those changes are yet, but I know that I know it's going to be big. I know it's going to change the way that they perceive the world. When we test our apps, we give kids iPads that are full of all the sort of the best games and the most fun games, and we see if ours measure up against them. That's a truth of our digital world, is that you will be measured against everything that's great. We're all competing against Disney. We're all competing against the best of the best that are out there. Kids have access to it all in a way that they didn't in the past. Most importantly, find out what children are experiencing emotionally and respect those feelings, respect those emotions. We forget how big and mysterious the world can be for kids. A 9-year-old can be, very sophisticated on a digital device, but still a 9-year-old, and the world is big and mysterious, and play is serious. And if you respect that, and you respect that within the storytelling, it opens up all sorts of possibilities. Finally, put yourself in the proper place. Too often, brands put themselves at the center, and the output of play is a brand narrative. I love Legos, but most modern Legos are sold as kits, disassembled toys that have a single endpoint. When the construction is done, that Lego will sit on a shelf. Play designers at Lego have created a story and a character, and the output is not something that lives in a kid's imagination or a question, but it's simply the desire to buy another set of Legos. So ask yourself, do children have an opportunity to create their own narratives with your content? Does your content give them space to breathe and to think about other stories? Does it spark ideas? I think if you respect kids, you respect parents, let the story and the content be in the center, and your brand can be off to the side. Those are the 10 things that we think about. Now, very quickly, I'm going to go through some of the things we think about when we make things. So, notwithstanding this idea of the brand being to the side, it is very important to create a strong brand. And so we, at Tinybop, started with brand. These were our sort of original icons that we didn't use, but it kind of gives you a sense of, this was the very first thing we did. And if you look at our apps now, you can see that there's a through line there. There's a consistency, and it's all because we built a brand book. And if you're working in kids' content and they're finding one story that you've done or one app that you've done, they live in a sea of other apps. So creating a brand helps parents find your apps. It helps children kind of know what they're getting when they find you. And so, we took this very seriously. It's the first thing we did, and we spent a lot of time and effort on thinking about what the brand would feel like, what it would look like. It's something that still guides us today. So I'm going to go through a couple of apps again very quickly. So the Human Body, very first app, created a mood board of inspirations, We created this app that's sort of quiet and mysterious based on all those inspirations. We localized the apps in 40 plus languages so that kids everywhere could use them, which has really helped because one of the advantages of now is that you can have a global audience if you respect that audience, especially true in animation. We use the device. We when we're demonstrating an eye, we use the camera. We turn on the camera and we don't tell kids that the image is flipped in the back of the eye. We just show them. We don't tell them that the pupil opens and closes in bright light. We just show them. This is our plants app. We use great artists, we localize. If you rub the clouds together, you might cause a fire, and that fire might be devastating and a little scary. And kids get freaked out when there's a forest fire. After the fire subsides, forest regrows, and plants and animals all come back. We think that's an important lesson. In our Homes app, again, we did a lot of research. We looked at homes all around the world. We talk about how homes work. Well, we don't talk about, we show how homes work. We let kids play with the different parts of the homes, and then they can go inside. And we're not telling children that children live differently around the world, but we're showing them. Questions we ask ourselves are, how do children play? Where do they sleep? What do they eat? And then can they do all that, within the app? Finally, the Robot Factory. The Robot Factory, again, from a couple of years ago, we started with this idea brand. We created, all these parts that had their own physics and could kind of move in their own way. And then kids create these little robots that have a sort of reality. These are actually relatively early tests of us figuring out the physics and sort of figuring out how to put the different parts together. Physics-based animation, it made everything feel a little bit real once we got it right. And the result of that was something that was really fun for a lot of kids, and that kids were able to create robots that seemed to come to life. They build robots, and then they put them out in the world, and the truth is nothing actually really happens in the world. They're just walking around and playing, but the kids are sort of filling in the blanks and telling stories. Over the past couple of years, kids have built a huge number of robots, an almost unbelievable number of little digital robots. We can be global and yet be relatively small. And I think the danger of that is that sometimes people start to look at the numbers. And I remember this story that I once heard from David Byrne, where it was talking about the talking heads, and he was talking about why he quit the talking heads. And he said that one time he was in this huge stadium and he was playing, and he looked out and he couldn't see people anymore. He just saw texture. The audience there were so many people in the audience, he just saw the audience as this texture moving around. I think it's really important not to see texture, not to see numbers, but to remember that each thing that you create is affecting a child, and it's that child's story, and it's part of their life. Our job is to prepare kids for the world they'll inherit. And, right now, the future world seems like a pretty scary place. Very little of what I do day to day was something that I learned in school. This is my second grade classroom. I can't think of a lot of the things that I learned in school that really helped me day to day. My parents' greatest gift to me was that they gave me time, they gave me space to tinker, and they gave me an unlimited access to a local library. They allowed me to just hang out at the library, and they gave me very good tools. This is the classroom of my kid when he was in the 6th grade. I try to give him space to tinker too. And some of that is physical. I still try to give him great tools and great stories, but some of it is digital too. Our apps are not an attempt to teach a list of facts. They're an attempt to get kids excited about ideas and to delve deeper on their own. They're building blocks. Many parents feel threatened by screen time. They feel like there's not enough time running around on summer nights or making sandcastles or blowing bubbles. And I totally agree. There's never enough time for those things. But the same parents who rail against screen time never get upset when their kids read and build. Kids can read and build on screens too. It's just another place to explore, and increasingly it's going to be a big part of our future world. Kids are following our modeling, and it's up to us to create content worthy of their time and their attention. So let's play. And I hope the next time that I talk to you, it's in person. I hope the next time that we talk, I will be presenting our TV series we're developing and producing right now. It's animated, and I think it's going to be fun. Thank you.